Afternoon and welcome to the Lincoln City Council meeting of March 20th, 2017. Let's all rise for the Pledge of Allegiance, followed by a moment of silent meditation.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
In accordance with LB 898, a copy of the Open Meetings Act is posted in the back of our chambers. The order of the business of the City Council is as follows. The clerk will call the items listed on the agenda under public hearing, and anyone wishing to speak on an item should come forward after the clerk reads that item. The applicant and those in favor should speak first, followed by those who are opposed. The applicant may then make one short rebuttal. Each speaker should begin by stating his or her name, address, and whether or not speaking in favor of or in opposition to the item. And if after testimony you could sign the pink slip of paper near the microphone, that would be helpful in keeping the meeting moving along. Testimony is limited to 5 minutes per speaker, and as a reminder, the timer will sound after 4 minutes. After all public hearings, the council will vote on resolutions and items listed under third reading. And on the second and last meetings of the month, immediately prior to adjournment, anyone may speak on any issue not on our agenda nor planned for a future agenda. Agendas are provided outside the entrance to chambers. Parking passes are available near our city clerk. And Teresa, if you could call the first item, please.
Certainly. We would request those giving testimony to please clearly state your name and address, and after you've testified, to sign in on the sign-in sheet laying on the podium. Public hearing consent agenda, items 1 through 5.
Would anyone like to come forward and speak to any of these items on our consent agenda? Okay, seeing none. Teresa?
All right, if not, we can vote on these items. We just have one. Item 3 was introduced by Camp.
So moved. Second.
By Carl, discussion? Please call the roll.
Camp?
Yes.
Christensen?
Yes.
Eskridge?
Yes.
Fellers?
Yes.
Gaylor Baird?
Yes.
Lamb? Yes. Raybold?
Yes.
Motion carried, 7-0. Next then are our public hearing liquor resolutions. Those giving testimony are asked to come forward, raise their right hand for the clerk to administer the oath. After the oath, witnesses shall state their names and addresses. I'll call items 6 and 7 together. They're the application of Yami Korean Cuisine for a Class C liquor license at 2840 South 70th Street, Suite 140, and the related manager application. Would you raise your right hand?
Yes.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give is the truth as you verily believe it to be?
Yes.
Thank you. Just state your name and address.
My name's Mungit Bomwang Tingnan, and 7811 Bonenson Street, Omaha, Nebraska 68122.
Welcome. If you'd like to tell us a little bit about your application that's before us today, please do.
This is my first time, so I don't know what to say.
Okay.
I'm just applying for.
To be the
Yeah.
manager on the liquor
Yes,
license? Okay.
yes,
Do
ma'am.
council members have any question about this? Go ahead.
Yes.
This is an existing restaurant. You're a new manager, is that correct?
Correct, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Okay.
Would you like to give a plug for the restaurant right now? Or advertise the menu or anything?
We just add a couple in-time menu, so that's about it.
Their bulgogi is really good.
Yes, be fun.
All
I
right.
don't have to go to Seoul anymore, okay.
Well, thank you very much. You can have a seat.
Okay,
Thank you. Would anyone else like to testify on this item? All right. Please call the next item, Teresa.
All right, next is item 8, manager application of Jaime Esquivel for Blue Sushi Sake Grill at 808 R Street, Suite 200. Do you raise your right hand? Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give is the truth as you really believe it to be?
Yes.
Thank you.
Welcome. Could you just tell us your name and address for the record?
Yes, Jaime Adrian Esquivel, 1024 Butler Avenue, Lincoln, Nebraska, 68521.
And do you want to tell us a little bit about the application you're making today?
Yes, I just transferred in as the new general manager for Blue Sushi in December. The old general manager went to Omaha, and I'm completing the process to take over the liquor license.
Okay. Any questions from the council? John?
As you may know, we get a report or the investigation, and There've been a few infractions on your part. Can you perhaps address those?
Yes, I came in for a liquor license application about 4 years ago. I addressed all except the latest one, which had been a DUI about 3 or 4 years ago on my listing there. To be quite honest, it was kind of a dark place that I was in working at Brothers Bar and Grill. There was a lot allowed to me and afforded to me at the age of 23, 24, running, $1.5, $2 million bar. And I definitely did my part in getting sucked into that. It wasn't until I decided to make a career move out into restaurants and further myself professionally that I was able to see where my mistakes were and where my growth laid ahead, And so I'm definitely on the right track to doing some amazing things, but this time with food, not with beer, liquor, or alcohol. It's just a small portion of what we do now.
Okay. Thank you. Other questions? Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Would anyone else like to testify on this item? Seeing none, Teresa, please call the next item.
Yes, next would be item 9, manager application of Garrett Lomley for 9 South Char Grill at 844 South Street. Hi, Garrett. Raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give is the truth as you really believe it to be?
I do.
Thank you.
My name is Garrett D. Lomelli, 1317 and a half O Street, Lincoln, Nebraska, 68508. And I am applying to be the alcohol manager for 9 South Char Grill here in Lincoln.
Do you want to tell us anything more about the restaurant?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
9 South Char Grill is going on its 10th year this April here in Lincoln. About a year ago, we opened a location out in Hickman, Nebraska. It's going well. I am currently, I've been with the company since September of this last year. I have actually known the owner for about 9 years, going on 10 actually. So I stepped in and I'm currently in process to take over. I am the general manager now, and so now I'm just trying to do the formal process of becoming the manager on the alcohol application.
Okay. John?
2 questions, if I may. First of all, again, I looked at the report that we received, and there are a couple things in your record there that have a little concern.
Absolutely.
You mentioned your general manager, I guess kind of a good case, worst case. As you know, depending on well, it doesn't matter on our recommendation. We'll just make a recommendation to the State Liquor Control Commission, and you can always have a hearing there. If we did that, you understand how the process would work?
Yes, sir. Conan Schaefer, as well as the State Patrol investigator, told me that that was a possibility of going before the Liquor Commission. I actually stood before you a year ago to open up Hopcat, and I was advised of the same thing then. So. Okay.
Well, we're kind of one of the hoops, and but we're
Sure.
try
Absolutely.
to look out for citizens and so forth. And then as general manager, I hate to say it worst case, but let's say that you don't. It would go to the Liquor Control Commission, and they would say no. Do you have another individual in the organization who could be have the manager application?
That is a possibility. The current general manager, he is no longer able to have it due to his record. His record's actually far more outstanding than mine, so I hope that I don't have an issue. But if that was the case, worst case scenario, I believe that's a road we can cross. We do have another manager available in the building that we could potentially use.
And the establishment's been successful. We want to support that. We just want to make sure too that
Absolutely.
Adequate leadership there.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you for understanding.
Yes, so did you get the license from the Liquor Commission for Hopcat?
So last year, I was currently the only manager living in the state who actually fulfilled all the requirements for Hopcat, being that they're a Michigan-based company.
Mm-hmm.
So my information and all that was submitted to, I guess, basically just kind of get the liquor application rolling. Right after I spoke with the chambers here, they actually resubmitted a new application for the general manager because at that time he had lived in the state for enough time to fulfill the requirements. So the application was never granted in my name.
Okay. Any further questions? Cindy?
So you're no longer at Hopcat?
Correct. I left Hopcat and started working for Brett Richardson's, again, who's a fraternity brother and friend of mine, in September.
I only mention that because I know they're in Munch Madness this year, so that it would be a good time to be at Hopcat.
Yeah, no, it's a great company, great food, great beer, great company, so
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here today.
thank you.
Okay. Would anyone else like to speak to this item? All right, please call the next item, Teresa.
All right, I'll call items 10 through 13 together. They are all applications for special designated licenses to cover an outdoor area measuring approximately 1,000 feet by 700 feet, plus the irregular upper level of baseball field measuring approximately 600 feet by 700 feet, including a bar measuring approximately 20 feet by 12 feet, and a buffet area to the south measuring 30 feet by 25 feet at Haymarket Park at 403 Line Drive Circle on May 25th between 6 p.m. and 11 p.m. The applicants are Glacial Till Vineyard, Capitol View Winery, Stonebridge Vineyard, and James Arthur Vineyards.
Welcome.
Hi.
Can you tell us your name and address for the record, please?
Taylor Wyatt, 927 North 86th Street, Lincoln, Nebraska, 68505.
And are you here representing Glacial Till then?
I am.
Okay. Well, tell us a little bit about your special event.
I'll be representing all four.
Oh, you will?
Yeah,
Wonderful.
all four, and then I'll actually be back another date because somebody got theirs in late, so we'll be seeing you again soon. But the event, I'm here to answer any questions, but it will be May 25th. It's the second wine night that we have had. We'll be having samples that people can purchase there of the different wines, of local wines of the area. The four on the list plus Whiskey Run Creek will be the fifth one. And I'm just here to answer any questions you might have.
Any questions from the council? Carl?
So this is a Salt Dog?
Yeah,
related
it'll be at a
event?
Salt Dogs game,
Okay.
opening night.
Opening night?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I do recall events like this last year. How did it go? Was it the
Went
first
well.
time?
Yeah,
It was the first time
everybody
last
that was
year?
involved with it last year is back this year, so if that's any coup for it, then yeah, it's going well. And it's National Wine Night is that night, so that's why we attached it to that night. So it should be a lot of fun. Again.
Wine with an H? No.
Went exactly what the same place.
Dad jokes.
Good try.
All right. Well, thank you for being here today.
You bet.
Right.
We'll see you
Thanks.
next week or sometime.
Anyone else care to speak to these items? All right, Teresa, then I think that
Madam
covers it.
Chair, I would like to make some motions. I would first move approval of items 6, 7, 10 through 13.
Okay. Moved by John and seconded by Roy to approve 6, 7, 10, and 13. Discussion on these items? All right, please call the roll.
Camp,
Yes.
Christensen,
Yes.
Eskridge.
Yes.
Fellers.
Yes.
Gaylor Baird,
Yes.
Lamb,
Yes.
Raybold.
Yes.
Motion carried 7-0.
And then, Madam Chair, on items 8 and 9, I'd like to move that we defer to the State Liquor Control Commission to review these two cases.
Second.
Okay, moved by John and seconded by Carl. Discussion?
Same thing, denial.
Same thing? Okay.
We have to either approve or deny.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
So
It's
this is a
either yes or
denial.
no.
That'd be a denial then.
Denying.
We're denying to decide. We'll let the commission decide.
Okay. Move denial.
Okay. So the move for denial of 8 and 9 was moved by John and seconded by Roy.
And-
Do you want to
Yeah,
discuss?
on discussion, I'd just like to say I appreciate the two gentlemen coming forward, and we're very supportive of your organizations and all, and so I guess this is just one that I think and we'll see what my colleagues say, would feel more comfortable letting you discuss this more with the State Liquor Control Commission. We wish you every bit of success in that endeavor.
Carl?
Thank you. As you know, the offenses, you're scored, and your scores are such that you will be automatically will be reviewed by the Liquor Commission. So just so that we're on the same page with them and consistent with them, that they're going to review it anyway. So that's why I think that we're voting as we are. They need to make that decision.
I knew that one of them was scored. Were they both scored? I guess that's my question, maybe for Conan, if he could come up, unless you have the answer to that handy.
I don't.
I think it'd be best for Investigator
Okay.
Schaefer to discuss it.
Conan Schaefer, investigator with the Lincoln Police Department. So the one manager application for Mr. Esquivel was scored, and I'll generally provide that information if it's an automatic, if it's over the commission uses a 20-point scale, and if it's over 20 points, then it is an automatic hearing. So I'll let you know about that. Those that are not automatic, I generally don't provide that information, but I do know after that packet was submitted to you, in speaking with the State Patrol investigator, that the recommendation for a hearing with the Liquor Commission was made.
On both?
Yes, on both.
Okay.
So the one that was, where you did not have any scoring information, that was referred as well.
Okay. Trent, did you have a question?
Yeah, I did. Mr. Lomely, his DUI was what, 4 years ago?
I believe that was a
5.
2000.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then his issue was traffic offenses, is that correct?
Yes.
And when did those traffic offenses occur? Sorry, I don't have the notes in front of me.
That's okay. The most recent was 2017.
In 2015.
Yeah, July of 2015. The DUI in 2012. Driving under suspension 2012, two different occasions. And then going back to 2004
Okay.
for speeding, various.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further discussion on the motion to deny? Go ahead.
Okay, I'm gonna vote against John's motion. I think we've seen other folks that have come up in front of this committee that have had more egregious offenses that we move forward. I completely respect John's opinion on that, but they are going in front of the Liquor Commission anyway. I do think that these are two guys that have had maybe some troubles in the past, and maybe even recently with driving, but as far as the alcohol-related offenses, they were several years ago, and I can understand how things in your early 20s change to your late 20s. So I'm gonna vote against the one to deny.
I remember my 20s.
Any further discussion? All right, please call the roll.
Camp,
Yes.
Christensen,
Yes.
Eskridge,
Yes.
Fellers,
No.
Gaylor Baird,
Yes.
Lamb,
Yes.
Raybold.
Yes.
Motion carried 6-1. Next on our public hearing resolutions, item 14, accepting the report of new and pending claims against the city and approving disposition of claims set forth for the period of February 16 through the 28th, 2017.
Would anyone here like to speak to a claim? If so, please come forward. Okay, seeing none, Teresa, please call the next item.
All right, next is item 15, resolving that the city council will not rely on higher residential property valuations in order to increase spending above the level established in the biennial budget.
Would you like to speak? Go ahead.
I'd like to speak about that since that's my resolution. It's become clear to me over the last couple months that this is an issue that is of great concern to members of our community with the recent property tax revaluations. Now, the dust is not settled on this, but the intent here of this resolution is to give citizens an indication of our direction so that they can take some calm at this point forward. Now, it's an issue that affects a lot of different taxing bodies, but I don't have any influence on those other taxing bodies. So I brought this resolution forward. It's a statement of intent that essentially we have gone through our process. We have established the spending priorities for our city for the next biennium, and we have a budget that is fully funded for those 2 years. And so that's the purpose behind this. Now, I also, we're going to be hearing some testimony from the administration that I welcome. We need to understand, the people need to understand and have realistic expectations about what's going on. This is not uncomplicated. There are a lot of issues involved here and things that have not been written down yet. But the resolution itself does not depend on the amounts settled on in the dollars. It is just telling people that we intend to stick to the budget that we passed and not rely on new dollars going forward. Our tax levy is set annually, and it will be set later on this year at the end of August, early September.
Okay. Other folks who'd like to speak to this item?
Good afternoon. I'm Rick Hoppy. I'm Mayor Byler's Chief of Staff. And I just want a couple minutes to make sure that we were all talking about the same thing when we discuss this with residents of our community. As Mr. Christensen points out, our ability to influence the outcome of what happens during the revaluation isn't at an individual homeowner level. It's at the level of setting the levy. And that can have an uneven impact on homeowners to begin with. And just to make sure that we're not putting people in a unrealistic frame of mind, we wanted to just chat a little bit about that. We had requested a memo from the new finance director, Brandon Kaufman, and if Brandon wasn't in the middle of moving from Topeka to Lincoln today, he'd probably be here talking about this himself. But we did want to highlight a couple of points that we think are important as you all consider this resolution, and to make sure the public is getting a full a full picture of what we're talking about. First off, there's the obvious. The city levy is only about 16 or 17% of the entire property tax levy. Therefore, the decision by the City Council not to take advantage of the revaluation only impacts that 16 or 17% of the levy. As Mr. Christensen points out, he isn't on the school board or the county board. Those jurisdictions may do something differently, and that may have an impact on the overall taxes paid by citizens. Since we can't hold homeowners harmless on the individual level, we can ensure that they aren't going to pay more in total city tax as a result of any change that's made or any effort made at the council level. As I mentioned, all we can really do is set the tax rate, but that will have an uneven effect for the following reasons. As the memo points out, commercial properties were not as comprehensively reviewed as residential properties. And since only 66% of the entire valuation is residential, the rest being personal and other types of real property, the remaining valuation will not rise nearly as much as the residential portions of the valuation. And since the tax levy cannot be assessed differently for those groups of properties, you may see, at least for the 18-19 budget, the residential portion having a greater percentage of those dollars we're spending in the budget than the commercial property owners, because their valuations will not go up as much as we anticipate that residential homeowners will face. Okay, and further, obviously, the impact on individual homes, that valuation plays a role here. Now, I think we've been told that we think there's about a 12.5% average valuation increase for residential properties. After the protests, Mr. Kaufman is predicting that probably falls to more like 10.5%, but that isn't the end of it. If you have an increase in your own home, you think of about 8 or 9%, you may think, aha, I'm below the average. Council comes down a certain amount on the levy, I should be okay and not pay any additional city taxes. The problem is you got to understand that the overall valuation has to cover not just the residential, but the portions of the base I spoke about earlier, the personal and the other portions of the real tax base. Mr. Kaufman is projecting that that will only mean the entire valuation will go up 6.2%. Okay, so if your valuation in residential is more than that, there's at least the possibility that you may still pay greater city tax dollars. Now, not as much as you would have had you left the levy the same. I want to be clear about that. So a levy decrease will not necessarily correspond with the average percent increase in the property owner's home values. Now, I had to read that to make sure I was saying it correctly because it's a little bit of a mouthful, but I think you understand what I'm getting at. Just because a value went up a certain amount, you all can't approximate that for each individual homeowner. There's going to have various limits. Now, obviously, some homeowners will see some sort of decrease if you follow through on this resolution intent. Some others will still see some sort of increase simply because of the factors that I mentioned. We also want you to take into consideration the concept of new growth versus the revaluation. Now, councils and mayors in the past have traditionally taken advantage of new growth in the tax base to keep up with the inflationary costs of providing services. Now, at this point, we don't know what is new growth and what is revaluation growth. I believe we'll learn more when the assessor releases the abstract on March 25th. And Mr. Christensen's resolution does allow for the estimated growth in 18-19 as part of the resolution. But what it doesn't take into account is if that growth, in new growth, is actually higher than what we projected. And so we want to keep an eye on that and decide how we want to factor that in the equation when we get to the mid-biennium changes. Finally, we'd ask you to consider the unforeseen circumstances language in the resolution, and we're glad to see that placed in the resolution. There are things that you don't necessarily see coming at you until you have to deal with them. For instance, I think many of you are aware that the state of Nebraska recently increased its estimate of the South Beltway by nearly 50%, from $200 million to $300 million. The city, the local jurisdictions are contractually obligated to pay 20% of that amount. So that means we could owe as much as another $20 million on top of the $40 million we've already set aside or tried to set aside. And we want to consider that we don't know from the state yet what their expectation is. They could require us to put in more money. We're very hopeful it's not $20 million, could be considerably less, just a factor to keep in mind as we move forward. We've talked ad nauseum about the Emerald Ash Borer and its impacts in the community and when it finally lands. We need to be aware that many millions could go towards that purpose. Finally, as a result of one of the LinkStat meetings we recently had on performance management, we had a very thorough discussion of where we're at on sidewalks. You may recall that we had put a considerable investment in sidewalks just a few years back with some COPS financing, and that seemed to catch us up. Unfortunately, the ongoing dollars have not been good enough to keep pace with those sidewalks that require a change in a 2-inch crack or have some ADA considerations. And we think that number is around $1.5 million a year just to meet those two categories of sidewalks deficiencies. The point is that there's real need that exists, and our ability to meet those needs is limited regardless of what you do here or what you do at the biennium. But it is important that the public understands the realities of the choices not to take advantage of the revaluation and the actual impacts of the decision not to take advantage of the revaluation. Now again, this is not to speak against the resolution as much as to make sure that we're setting our expectations at a reasonable level as a community. We understand quite well why the City Council would want to reassure citizens about this as we move forward. Sherry Wolf from the Budget Department is here in case you ask a number of questions I have no hope of answering.
Okay, Jane and John.
Well, I just have a few questions, and not sure if Sherry is the one to. In the current budget, you typically have, or at least on the county board, they typically have a placeholder anticipated for the annual evaluations, a very conservative estimate to help with that flexibility in the budget. Can you tell us a little bit about what is currently in the city's budget as that placeholder?
For next year. I'm sorry, I can't tell you what was in there for next year at this point in time. I can sure get back to you on that, though.
Okay, but is it standard and customary for the city to put in a placeholder every year for a percentage increase? Mm-hmm. So how does that impact? How does this wording impact that at all?
It does not, because that's included in the resolution that we are accounting for that specifically.
The dollars that Roy is trying to hold constant would already take that into consideration.
Yes.
Okay, and so then you were talking about the property tax rate and how there's a difference between the residential and the commercial. Has the finance department done any projections about, so if you can't differentiate between the two, commercial property and residential property, the property tax rate is what is asked for being held at the 2016-2017 rate, is that correct?
The rate will change to
change.
hold the dollars constant is what's being proposed.
But you can't differentiate between the residential and the commercial.
No, by law we could only have one
Has
rate.
the finance department done any preliminary projections about, from the report, it looks as if 60% of the total valuations are residential.
Correct.
Residential.
Roughly.
And the balance is 34% is railroad, commercial, industrial, ag values. For that 34%, has that been projected out if the property tax rate is lowered for the next budget year? What is that dollar amount going to look like?
We haven't done any specific calculations on that at this point in time. We'd have the same issues with what portions are going to be growth versus revaluation, and we don't have any information from the assessor's office on how those properties are going to be impacted. We will have that later in March, the 25th. The
Of this year?
Yes, they will certify this valuation at the end of the month, and then we'll have more information about the commercial properties and the centrally assessed property as well.
So you could get us a preliminary projection of where the revenues are going to shake out to make sure that we anticipate lowering perhaps the residential, but we are not certain if commercial will be dropped lower, so that our budget will be or may not be balanced. The revenues coming in.
I wouldn't really anticipate that it's actually going to drop. It would probably be more a question of how much it's going to increase and how that's going to compare.
Okay, and then I thought I heard you say that, how are you going to factor new construction in?
Right,
Well,
new
right.
construction is a percentage of this average 12.5, but we don't know how much of that 12.5% may be due to growth, and we would certainly want to take advantage of growth. Typically, we have in order to provide service to those new areas and to deal with inflationary factors.
So based on the wording in this, would that's
All accounted for. This is a statement of intent.
Okay.
And it's non-binding. Okay, and these issues you're bringing up are important issues, but they are accounted for in the wording of the resolution, number one. But it's good to remind everybody that annually, we adjust all these numbers, including the levy, every year.
Right.
And we will, regardless of this resolution, we do it every year. And so we'll go through that process again at the end of this fiscal year.
I think the distinction is Mr. Christensen clearly intends to go that route. We just don't know which it is at this point.
Right.
Now, the resolution relies on our projected increase in the 18-19 budget, not what the actual increase will be. And that was the point I was trying to make earlier.
Okay, and then the way it's worded, it just specifically focuses on residential property. It doesn't really
Right.
have a concern about commercial.
Well,
But aren't they
commercial
all
properties
linked?
have not been reevaluated, but we're talking about intent of what we plan to do. We all understand that
Mm-hmm.
we weren't done any favors by having a residential revaluation absent a commercial revaluation in the same year. It would have been better for everyone if they had both been done simultaneously, or at least in the same fiscal year. But that's not what we're dealing with. So we just got to deal with what we've got.
So then I have a question, probably it's a legal question, because the way the resolution is worded, it talks about whereas leaving the city's tax rate at the same level for 2017-2018 fiscal year will result in an unintended and unplanned property tax revenue increase. But then down below in the therefore resolved, it just talks about residential and omits commercial completely. Is that
Well, the,
a contradiction?
no, I don't.
Because it's calling for maintaining the same tax rate level for 2017, 2018, but it only refers to residential. Shouldn't it refer to?
Jane, if you would like to add commercial in there, I'd be happy to do that.
Well, I guess where I'm going with all these questions is that in my mind, I think a delay of a week would be appropriate so that we could have further clarification about how the numbers actually shake out, to have a better comfort
Jane,
level.
the numbers in this really, for this resolution's purposes, don't matter. It's the statement of intent we're talking about, and in principle, what we intend to do when we come to actually setting the levy at the end of our fiscal year. This is telling people how we intend to handle it, not exact numbers that we will have as a result.
Well, I as a business person, I don't typically make decisions based on intentions. I make business decisions based on numerical values that direct us to make fiscally sound, practically wise decisions that could impact the other classes of properties that we depend on to keep our budget in balance. It is clearly all of our intent not to burden our residential taxpayers, but without knowing all the facts or even looking at preliminary projections based on actual numbers to help guide us in making the best decisions, I don't feel comfortable acting on something based on just our intention. I clearly want to do what is in the best interest of all our taxpayers and all properties that are being assessed and evaluated to make sure that we have the appropriate funding sources, not excessive funding sources. We don't want to overtax people, but without looking at all the numbers, preliminary projections, I think it's imprudent to make a decision at this time. I think a delay of a week, if it's coming out March 25th, our next meeting is March 27th. I don't know if it's reasonable or unreasonable to have the finance department come up with some projections to see where we're going to completely shake out.
I would maybe just ask
Sherry?
if the assessor's data comes out on Friday, that maybe we could have a week to look at it before we report it back to you. A little time to analyze it. You're saying a week delay would bring us just to next Monday. We won't get that information probably till sometime on Friday.
Okay, so what would be a reasonable?
I think a week would be a reason. If it could be a 2-week delay, I think a week would be a reasonable time for us to look at it.
And I think that's important to do. I don't want to detract from this, but I think it's good to get a whole picture of where all the other properties are going to be shaking out. And particularly with discussions about ag values being decreased, is it going to put us in a position that would make all of us feel uncomfortable?
John and then Cindy.
Yes, I have a couple of comments. On the last one, there's not going to be a decrease in commercial. It's going to go up. So what it is, Mr. Hoppy said something about there could be a decrease in commercial. It's not going to decrease. It's going to be less of an increase, if anything. So they're going to be revalued next year. We'll see an increase. That's just the way it works.
Mr. Camp, I don't think I said decrease, but if I did, thank you for the correction, because you're correct about that.
Was the point you were making, Rick, that if the rate goes down and the commercial properties valuations don't increase very much, they could essentially pay less by the decrease in the rate?
I think that would, I would take a snowball to hell before that.
I was talking about shifting the burden. Okay, if the commercial increase isn't as much as the residential, then the overall proportionality of the dollars shifts to the residential. That's what I was trying to get across.
I'll come back to that in a moment, too. Mr. Hoppy, you made the statement, and it said, other groups will not rise as much in the future valuation. Word for word, I copied that down. What did you mean?
Other groups, I think what I was talking about was the other taxing jurisdictions in terms of whether they intended to take advantage of the valuation or not.
Well, we know that we were the ones that increased the levy more than the other jurisdictions, percentage-wise.
I think we're having an apples and oranges discussion. What I'm talking about is going forward here, that if we pass this resolution and the council and the mayor decide that we're not going to take advantage of the revaluation at the mid-biennium, the point I'm trying to make is we're only 17% of the levy. The other 83%, those jurisdictions which comprise that amount, could take advantage, could not take advantage. In short, we're not the only factor. That's all I was trying to get across.
Okay, no, that's true. Okay. Aren't we, I guess one of the concerns I have is in any scenario, because of the budget increase, that raised about $2 million more that we're going above normal budget increases. So we had that increase. And then since last September, August, when we passed the budget, we've had three major events. We've got the revaluation, which sounds north of $2 million a year in increased cash, above our $2 million increases that resulted from that. Secondly, we've had savings in some executive labor negotiations of $1.1, $1.2 million. Third, we've got a wellfield grant that we budgeted for Ashland, and as I recall, that was $1.5 million.
I believe so. Now, that would be a
it
different
was
funding source. That would
7.2.
be strictly utility revenues.
How much was that?
7.2 million.
7.2 million.
Thanks, Mickey.
Oh, wow. Okay. I guess my point being, we've suddenly found that, I mean, none of those were necessarily guaranteed, but the odds are on a number of forays that you're making through grant writing, through other revenue increases. And I mean, we increase fees across the board from 3 to 15%. We're seeing a lot of cash flow there. And so backing up, we're always going to have unforeseen situations. And as my colleague, Ms. Raybold, was asking, we have a contingency fund. And I mean, it's substantial. And we also have reserves that are substantial. You know, so I think that what we do know, though, is that we continue to increase revenues so much, fees so much. If you look in the last decade, it's incredible what we've done with the LES dividend and all types of fees and the occupational taxes, whether it be for the arena. And I know this isn't solely the city, but these are things that our citizens are bearing, and those on fixed incomes and retirement and so forth. You know, I mean, Social Security recipients got maybe $5 increase a month and all. So I guess I appreciate Mr. Christensen coming forward with something that is just an intent to say, we're going to tell you, we're going to hold our feet to the fire, is how I look at this. And again, it's really a discretionary thing, but it makes a statement now that we've had those significant savings that give us a lot more breathing room, and I'd almost say we didn't really need the increase last August, but that's water over the dam. But I think in light of all of this, we need to be as careful as we can with the citizens and let them know we're going to be fiscally responsible. As to all the needs, and again, we get into needs versus wants, and a lot of wants get categorized as needs, but I mean, there's a whole laundry list of things that the city and or different groups would like to have done. And it's just like a home budget, a business budget that Jane and I run. We can't do everything immediately, and we stage it down the road. And we're looking at some projects now we're bringing forward 5 years earlier than they were originally intended to be done. There are a whole host of things, and so I think we owe it to the citizens to do something like this. Say, hey, we're going to be fiscally responsible here, and that's how I view this, and showing the intention, redoubling our efforts to say, yes, we're going to be very careful.
Madam Chair, I'm sorry.
Cindy.
Thank you. I just had a couple questions, Sherry. Thanks for being up here. Appreciate it. The tax levy that we pass does extend to residential and commercial properties in Lincoln, is that correct?
Yes, we have just one tax rate.
Okay. And as I understood you to understand from this, Mr. Christensen's resolution, this resolution is an intention to hold the dollars constant, correct?
Yes.
And the finance department is able to give us the figures at the end of any given period in order to do that, correct?
Once we have actual valuations, yes.
Okay. And in fact, usually as we get really close to, when we pass a budget, we don't know that anyway.
Right. These preliminary valuations come out in March, and then I believe it's August 20th when the final certified valuations are available. Maybe.
Okay, and so then when we did the budget for 17-18, we absolutely we're just dealing with constant dollars that we could spend. We don't really know the percentage.
Yes, for
okay.
17-18, yes, and
Thank
some projections.
Thank you.
Did you have a
I was
question?
only going to respond to Mr. Camp. I understand what you're saying and don't disagree with virtually any of it, with one small exception. You talked about how the tax increase last year may not have been necessary in light of the future labor settlement funds and the grant for the well field. It's important to note that both those are one-time sources, and I would argue that it's precisely the opposite. You wouldn't be considering this resolution right now to not take advantage of the revaluation had that increase not happened, because we would have had a gap in our year-to-year financing that we would have had to close, and we would have had a conversation right now about whether we use the revaluation to do that.
Carl?
I have some, I don't know who to ask this question to exactly, but a definition of unforeseen circumstances of what may or may not be included in that. Rick, you take a stab at it? Or?
That sounds like a better question for our talented city attorney, if I can defer.
All right. So there's some unforeseen circumstances, or maybe they're kinshemic projections, or there are things that appear to be out there, but they aren't here yet. For example, we've heard about the South Beltway and the expected increase that we might have for that. So is that an unforeseen circumstance, or is that do we know about that? Similar kinds of things, the legislature's struggling with the state budget and looking at cuts to the state budget and how that may or may not impact the city. Is that a foreseen or is that unforeseen? National budget, changes happening there and how that might impact us, whether it's through urban development or programs we do with kids or whatever that might be, aging partners, whatever. Is that foreseen or is that unforeseen? And then I guess the last one I would ask about, I've been part of a team with LPD group meeting for the last couple of months on looking at possibly reconfiguring our teams. We have 5 teams with LPD and looking at maybe going to 4 as a way to cover the city, the expanding city, with fewer numbers of law enforcement officers. So is that foreseen or unforeseen? Can you help me out? How unforeseen does unforeseen have to be?
Jeff Kirkpatrick, City Attorney. As we have dealt with, and of course we're relatively new in the whole biennium budget process, but if you look back on the first 2 times through this, the city has made adjustments based upon what is foreseen and unforeseen. Certainly when you look at the South Beltway, for example, you say, is that unforeseen? No, the city knew that we would have to make contributions to the South Beltway, and we knew because of contractual obligations that our obligation was 20%. But when the number moves from 200 million to 300 million, then we didn't foresee that. When you voted on the budget in August of 2016, the number was 200 million. If you look at a much smaller level, if you have a rec center that develops a leak, and so you're putting buckets out, children are playing around buckets because every time it rains, you've got the leaks coming through. Now, you knew that at some point, probably was on the CIP, at some point you were going to be replacing that roof. But the point where it starts leaking every time it rains, that wasn't foreseen when it was placed on the CIP. And so it becomes really back to the council when you're looking at these different things. Is this something that we foresaw? Is this something we make an adjustment from within the budget? So you talk, for example, about consolidating patrol areas with the LPD. That comes down, was it foreseen? No. If it's something that the command staff starts talking about since the last budget was adopted, then it's not foreseen. Are there expenses? Maybe you save money. Maybe the LPD looks at that and says, well, yes, there's some expenses that come with that, but there's also some budget savings, or we can move money from this source to another source. So I guess at the end of the day, it becomes very complicated. The short answer is, if there's a majority of the council that feels comfortable saying it's unforeseen, they can make that adjustment at the mid-biennium budget period.
Yeah, thank you.
Roy.
Thank you.
I think, Carl, all the issues you brought up are good arguments for why we should have an annual, not a biennial budget. But we have a biennial budget, and we have set our spending priorities, and we have fully funded those. So that's what the intent of this is based upon.
Thank you, Jeff, before you leave. Thank you. Okay, as I understand the biennium budget process, there's a provision that states once a biennium budget is passed, we can't change that budget anyway, except under certain circumstances, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, and so does this resolution conform with those certain circumstances?
Right, and the circumstances are emergency, which is not only unforeseen but dire. I don't know that this council has ever, maybe if you go back far enough, there have been an emergency circumstance, but those don't happen very often. But the other is unforeseen circumstances, and when the biennium budget idea was adopted, the understanding was you wouldn't have to recreate the whole budget, but there are going to be adjustments that would likely come up within that 2-year period. And that's what the unforeseen circumstances is in the budget process, and that's why it's specifically included in this resolution, so that there's a acknowledgement by this council in adopting it that there may well be some changes that will have to be done next August.
Thank you.
Welcome.
I have a question. In the memo from the Finance Department, I thought one of the most striking pieces of information was actually that the assessor has indicated moving forward it will review on an annual market basis the values of homes. Do I understand that correctly, that instead of an every 3-year cycle, it will be an annual revaluation?
Yes. That's my understanding,
So what's the intention of the Finance Department in adjusting its operations to deal with that? Because if you are setting a biennial budget and having to make an estimate for values in the second year, in the past we've had it every 3 years. I mean, how will you cope with the change?
I was waiting for you to take care of it.
Sherry Wolf-Durbo. Well, first, I don't really want to tie the hands of or speak for our new finance director, who will get to give us some direction on that. But we have made projections for the 17-18 year, and Steve knew when the every 3-year revaluation periods were, and with all of his experience, made some adjustments for those things. So as we go forward, the idea is to smooth this out better, and talking with the assessor's office based on state law and the range of 92% to 100% that I think commercial and residential property valuations have to fall into. They want to look at things on more of an annual basis, because if they don't keep up and the state steps in, they will just place all the properties right in the middle of that range. So that's their logic for changing their plans. And like I said, as we go forward, we will just try to be more accurate with the new model in our projections.
I'd say, to add to that, I'd say short term, it's a little more difficult to make that prediction, but as data accumulates over what the average yearly increase is, I think the Finance Department will have a better handle going forward on what that could be, and it may actually be a boon to us to have that kind of more steady approach.
I assume it's being done in part to allow for a smaller percentage on a more regular basis, as opposed to a big blip like perhaps we're seeing this year. Potentially.
On the valuation years, there's always questions and discussion then about if you get to take advantage of all that revaluation.
Okay. Any other questions? Did you have a question?
I want to hold my questions till after the public has a chance to testify.
Okay, all right. Why don't we see if we have other folks who'd like to come forward and speak to this item?
Good afternoon. My name is Kobe Mack, appearing today on behalf of the Lincoln Independent Business Association. Members of the council, your 2-year budget is set. Your 2-year budget is done. It has assumed some new growth. Property taxes were also increased to fund this year's budget and to fund next year's budget. And so the way we see it, you should have the funds that you need moving forward. On top of that, you now have over $1 million in extra money due to personnel savings. No one expected that you would have an extra $1 million, but you do. And now there may be some conversations coming forward as well on how to spend that $1 million. In short, though, you don't need the property tax reevaluation windfall for your budget. There should be no debate about what to do with the reevaluation windfall. We ask that you return it to the taxpayers. The windfall is not coming from commercial property. It's not coming from office property, retail, or manufacturing. The windfall would be coming from homeowners. As a community, we think we ought to stand up for families and their ability to afford a home. Certainly, the City Council could find dozens of ways to spend the windfall, but we're asking today that you would return it to the taxpayers. I would be happy to attempt to answer any questions you've got.
Carl.
So if in the increased cost of the South Beltway, we're told that the city needs to kick in another $20, $40 million. We didn't plan on having that money. We don't have that money. What would you suggest?
Well, I think that's an interesting argument, and I guess I will go back to the fact that we continue to find money for projects that are needed or worthwhile. I believe we're now spending $15,000 of city funds to photograph wetlands. $35,000 was just found for the Willard Community Center. You have over $1 million in unexpected money right now due to personnel savings. There is a pot of money, the last I knew, I think it still exists, of $5 million to widen Highway 2. And perhaps if we build a South Beltway and move all of that traffic, or some of that traffic, to the south, we could use some of that. We could slow down or adjust the time frame for widening Highway 2. But it does seem to me that when we need additional funds, there are ways to find it. Conversely, I will also tell you that recently, LIBA has supported many tax increases. We supported the 911 tax for new police and fire stations. We supported the arena tax. We supported the school bond tax. We supported the most recent stormwater bond issue last year for the city of Lincoln. Would we support one to help with the South Beltway? We're willing to have that conversation. What we're asking today is that you reduce this windfall that would be coming from homeowners.
Yeah.
No questions? Jane?
Kobe, as we look at this, I want to make sure all the listening audience out there is not misled. We understand that they're facing a property tax increase that is really unexpected to their budgets. The concern I have is that I don't want to mislead them, because they make it seem like, okay, if the valuations they get increase their property by $100, they're thinking, great, I am going to get $100 in savings because the Lincoln City Council is going to hold the line on taxes. And you and I know that that's not the case, because out of that $100, the Lincoln City Council is $17 of that. That $83, as Rick was talking about, $66 of that is Lincoln Public Schools, Lancaster County Board, Railroad Transportation Safety District, additional jail bond issues. So all these other issues out there make that $83 of increase. So the question to you is, does LIBA intend to talk to the Lincoln Public Schools and the Lancaster County School Board and Railroad Transportation Safety District? And you can't make a dent in the bond issues that are out there that are set, but how do you want to approach it system-wide? Because we're just a chunk of that pie, and I respect the work that you're doing to make sure that we are always mindful of our taxpayers. I mean, I don't think you can be an elected official and not be very mindful of our taxpayers and how much they have to pay. But what is your intent? Are you going to go before those elected bodies and talk to them about that as well?
Absolutely we are, and we would welcome any assistance perhaps that you would want to provide.
Additional questions?
Thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak to this item? All right, seeing none, did you have a question for staff?
No, I'm going to wait until the voting session.
Okay, all right. Teresa, please call the next item.
All right, I'll call item 16, use permit 126F as in Frank, application of Wilderness Woods Holdings LLC to reduce the parking requirement for office uses on Lot 2 from 1 stall per 300 square feet to 1 stall per 350 square feet on property generally located at Wilderness Woods Place and Executive Woods Drives.
Good afternoon, council members. My name is Mike Eckert with Civil Design Group, here today on behalf of Hausman Holdings, which is an entity owned by Hausman Construction. We are proposing a reduced parking ratio for, I'll put the map up here to give you a little perspective. for a new office building that they're building out at the Wilderness Ridge office complex. Hausman is currently in this office right here, and they have purchased this area that allows for 40,000 square foot of office. 20,000 square foot will be their first phase of the building. And in order to do some landscaping and some other things they wanted to do in the parking lot, it precipitated a tighter parking stall count. So we've worked with the planning department on this. We've submitted floor plans that show the amount of office space that they're going to have, and they have, being a construction company, a bit more storage than typical. And they are on notice that if that storage was converted to office, we would have to come and revisit this request for a waiver. And they're going to start out with just 20,000 square foot, and then they would expand eventually, potentially with another 20,000 square foot. And so the waiver applies to the entire area. In the interim, they'll have plenty of parking in this first phase. So most importantly, as you know, Yankee Hill is up here. This road goes out to the entrance, which would be about 20th. This goes out to the entrance, which would be about 16th Street. So a pretty secluded area. The lodge, the clubhouse for the golf course is here. And then over the past several years, many of you know, we've converted this area that was office to multifamily, this area to multifamily, and this area has been approved to multifamily. And so the Schleich family, who is a major shareholder in all those entities, we have direct correspondence from them saying they're okay with this waiver that we have with the planning department. They are the only neighbor really out here that could be affected by this. And so, and we have a good close relation. They have a good relationship with Hausman, and so and have got some agreements in place that, you know, if there's any issues, that they would expect them to alter their parking lot to get back to the standard ratio. So with that, we're taking it, just reducing it by 50 units per square foot, which, so from 1 stall per 300 to 1 stall per 350, and we can park that amount.
Questions? John?
Yes, Mr. Eckhart. Looks like a great project. You mentioned they're starting out with 20,000 square feet, but ultimately they want to double it to 40.
Right.
And again, if you're figuring the 350, the ratio on the full 40,000, which I understood you to say.
Yes.
Then, and so yes, they would, having half the space, but once they get there, you said they might either be willing to revisit it or what have you. Obviously, parking's important. What would trigger that? How would we, you know, if we approve this change, how do we
So
ensure that it does come back for reevaluation?
This amendment covers all 40,000 square feet, and so we would have to park at least 1 stall per 350, which we have a site plan that shows how that would work. And so the things that could change is, for example, if they converted some of the storage space in the existing building, then our parking requirements then going to go up. And so that would reduce the amount of square foot they could do in the second building, Councilman. So those are kind of some of the adjustments that may come in time, and they may not build out a full 20,000 square foot on the second building either. But we have shown how, if this building was to be emulated with on the second site, that we can park it, get enough parking for 1 stall per 350 for the entire thing. So
on the 40,000, how many stalls would that total ratio?
To do the quick math, I think it's 116 with the first building, so if we doubled that, I think that's 232 then.
Thank you.
Okay. Other questions for Mike? All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Would anyone else like to speak to this item? Questions for staff? Okay. Please call the next item, Teresa.
All right, next is item 17, approving the award of contract to the low bidder for the agreement between the city and the Nebraska Department of Roads for the South Coddington Avenue and West Van Dorn Street intersection safety project.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen of the City Council. Craig Aldridge, Public Works Engineering Services. Here today to ask for your approval to award bids, award contract to TCW Construction for the Coddington and Van Dorn intersection safety project. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Carl.
Thank you, and thanks, Greg, for being here.
Sure.
Not so much about the award of the contract, but just some questions about the project itself. Could you tell me a little bit about the schedule, when you expect it to begin and end, and also if there have been neighborhood meetings or if there will be prior to construction beginning?
Sure. The tentative start of construction is scheduled for April 24th, so that's a little over a month from now. The Nebraska Department of Roads has, based on a very complicated formula, set this as a 188 calendar day contract. So running the math, that puts final completion of this project as October 28th, assuming we have no approved delays. As far as notification of the public, we do actually have a pre-construction open house that we have scheduled for the 13th of April. I believe that's a Thursday evening. That will be from 5 to 6:30 p.m. at Roper Elementary School, which is on South Coddington there. We will have more information to be released, press releases, advertisements in the newspaper, probably some dynamic message signs out in the area. Among other things, to notify people of that open house. But we definitely encourage the public. There has been a fair amount of interest in this project for a long time, so we definitely encourage anyone that has questions about the project to attend that meeting to learn more about what we're going to try to undertake.
Okay. And then just one follow-up. Will there be times when the intersection is closed, or will you have it open at all times?
Good question, one that we've gotten quite a bit. We've actually phased this so that we'll have 3 legs of that intersection open at all times, depending on how we have that phase and which portion they're working on. For example, the first phase of this project will be primarily focused on the south leg of that intersection. So while they work on that south leg, we will have the west, east, and north legs of that intersection open. Once the south is done, we'll flip to the north,
okay.
And then we'll have west, east, and the south legs open. And just depending on which leg we're working on, that kind of dictates how the T is oriented as far as how that intersection is accessible.
Thank you.
I just have a question on the logistics with it. Because of the number of events at Pinewood Bowl, I think that west leg, access on that west leg is pretty important to keep traffic moving to the parking area for Pinewood Bowl visitors. Is that going to kind of coincide to either the first part of the project or probably that last October when maybe there's no events planned for October? I don't know that for sure, or probably September and October or no events.
Yeah, that's also a very good question. We have had some coordination with Pioneers Park and Pinewood Bowl regarding their events and their schedule. The west and east legs of that intersection will be very short closures in duration. When we talk in regards to the overall impacts to that intersection, we're talking maybe 2 weeks for each leg. They'll be closer towards the end of the project. Those will kind of be the last things that we do. We'll have to keep a real close eye on that and definitely coordinate more as we get into construction. Again, we know weather in Nebraska can play havoc on schedules and how things fall in line, but we will definitely have to do some coordination with them as the project goes on. But as of now, we don't anticipate that will cause any delays or any impacts to the functions out there, at least in regards to the west leg.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Would anyone else like to testify on this item? Okay, seeing none, Teresa, please call the next item.
All right, next are our public hearing ordinances, second reading, and related resolutions. Item 18 is Comp Plan Conformance 17002, declaring approximately 1,200 square feet of property generally located at 2201 South 17th Street as surplus property.
Members of the City Council, David Landis, Urban Development Department Director, the applicant in this case. It was a surprise to find that we owned a piece of property that had not been part of several other transactions as this property moved to Bryan and then ultimately stands as a small obstacle to the ultimate disposition which is the desire of the county to part with this whole project for a mental health area. This small 1,200 square foot area wasn't part of a transaction that sold the larger provision this way or the much larger piece of property that way. Apparently it was kept perhaps because there is a maintenance area here and there might have been a desire to have access to the building. But I have to say it eludes most everybody's memory. It just was where we drew lines of what was needed, and this wound up being left. It's going to ultimately be a transition from one public entity to another, so it's not going to be a matter of a sales price. It is there because it will be important to the ultimate distribution of the total amount of property that the county intends to do. This did go to the Planning Commission. They did say it was 9-0, consistent with the comp plan, and it was on their non-controversial schedule when they took it up. The purpose of the surplus request is to allow for the transfer of the property to Lancaster County in connection with the sale of the mental health center. The city has not been maintaining the property since the sale of the Lincoln General Hospital and has no need to retain it.
Questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Would anyone else like to testify? All right, seeing none, please call the next item.
Item 19, approving a purchase agreement between the city and Rashid Badir and Media Kahan for the sale of city-owned property generally located at 623 South 19th Street.
Members of the City Council, David Landis, Urban Development Department Director, applicant in this case. We may be seeing the last of these kinds of phenomenon since this project was underscored by home funds, and home funds are part of the budget controversies in the federal government at the moment and are scheduled to be zeroed out in the coming years. So this may be the last one of these that we see. This is a piece of property that we ultimately came to own because of the purchase of two pieces of adjoining land, the demolition of that, and then the building of two very similar houses. This is the second of two. You would have seen the first one, which we sold for $105,000. This sells for $120,000. It is, in fact, the asking price for this piece of property. And this concludes the project that we had, and it took us a rather good long time to get through it, for the 623 South 19th Street property. It's not uncommon for purchasers not to want to necessarily come to the city council, so you don't you rarely see a purchaser, which is why I'm here to support the sale. This is a neighborhood that can use single-family home ownership, and this is a contribution to the well-being of the neighborhood. It replaces two deteriorated and dilapidated buildings and represents one of the bright spots of what's happened. There is a neighborhood association in the area, and they're highly supportive of this project, and we're glad to do that. This is the last shoe, and it represents the final part of this pattern. But there are a couple of reasons to say why it would not happen exactly this way again. One of which is the Feller's Doctrine. We wouldn't buy redevelopment projects for over $50,000 with coming to you first. So that's a difference. And the second thing is that the pot of money that we've used here are home funds, and they seem to be, at least at the moment, in jeopardy.
Question? Cindy.
Thank you for coming forward, Dave. So as I understand it, because I remember when the project was going through, so there's a special fund from which we take the funds to buy the property, and then we develop, and when we sell it, also funds go back into the property, or excuse me, into the special fund, correct? From the sale of the property?
When we buy and sell land, let's imagine that we were selling the land we had just before this, but to a private sector, and they were going to pay us $10,000. It would go into a special fund, but that would have been the land acquisition fund. Here, the money, because it is tied with federal strings, keeps those strings and comes back and is spent consistent with federal law. So yes, it comes back to a special fund, but the special fund is the use of money for home program purposes.
I understand. And so with the sale, with this particular sale, I guess my question is, these funds then still have those strengths?
They would, and if I had a preference, I'd build a mini house consistent with at least one of the city council members, which I think is a potential for affordable housing that we have not explored significantly in this city. It could make use of irregular lots, including ones that the city owns that currently today have very little market because they're not what we would call a buildable lot. But if you change the size and shape of the house that's on it, you can make some of those properties valuable. And that's what I'd do with the money if I had my preference, unless I received direction differently from the city council.
Thank you. Can you tell me about how much funds that will leave remaining in the kind of the home fund type project?
We do have an appropriation from this year, and we'll be generally spending that for house rehabilitations and improvements. But this is the second of two purchases. So we're going to have about $200,000 here. Now, the first purchase, we do have for a house that, in fact, we're building at 224 North 28th Street, which is about a 500 square foot mini house. This would give us close to the means to do that a second time. And we think every example that we can show the community of, single-family home ownership, but that is in the realm of possibility for a broader section than normal, is a positive in this community. We have a significant problem with affordable housing in Lincoln. And we hope to turn the proceeds of this into identifying at least one option on how to proceed.
Thank you.
Roy.
I'm all with you, you know that, on the small homes. And having a couple of example homes is really good because, as we know, there's nothing quite so irritating as a good example.
What a wonderful quote. I know that, and you've done Mark Twain justice in this case.
Thank you.
Carl.
Thank you. Okay, Mr. Landis, so this house we're selling for 120.
Mm-hmm.
We sold a previous one for 105.
Well, I think my recollection was, I think maybe that was a counteroffer. We might have sold it for 110.
Okay.
But
All right.
somewhat less
Somewhere.
than this. This
Okay.
is the face value of what we asked for. In that case, we did an offer, a counteroffer, and then a midpoint.
Okay, so we've made approximately 230,000 on both sales.
But we spent home monies to do that.
That's what I was going to. So talk about, if you can recall, what we spent on the properties and demolition.
It takes more to build this house than you can afford to sell it to a low-income person.
Right.
So this house cost in the terms of $160,000. But a $160,000 house is harder for a low-income person to purchase. In fact, the average house in Lincoln, Nebraska is selling for $150,000. Now, that's low by national standards, but it also means that our wages, which are also low in this community, don't necessarily make everybody able to pay for and buy a $160,000, $70,000, or $80,000 house. One of the buildings that we took down was an 8-plex. It was over $100,000 to buy it.
No.
We also had to demo those buildings, and they were asbestos-filled. The 8-plex had a list of police calls that were 3 pages long, including child abuse, rape, and heroin. And I can tell you that the day in which those buildings were down, the neighborhood said we'd done a good work. An elderly lady came over to one of the guys demoing the building and brought him cake. But there's no doubt about it. If the market could do this and make money, they would be doing this. They can't.
Yeah.
Which is why this is here.
Okay, thank you.
John.
I'd like to piggyback on what Mr. Eskridge was saying. So you said it costs $160 to build this house that we're discussing. How much did it cost to build the other house?
About the same. They're very similar, John.
Okay. And out of curiosity, do you know what that other house is valued at from the assessor standpoint?
I don't. What a good question to ask.
And then further, you said we paid $100,000 to buy the lot, which would have included.
Not the lot, an 8-story I'm sorry, an eightplex that was a model of the kind of building you wouldn't want your child to live within 6
What are the
blocks.
lot costs on top of that?
Cost a lot.
I'm sorry?
You're right, it cost a bunch to do that.
So there was extra for the lot above the 100,000?
There were 2 lots. One was a ramshackle house for which we paid 22, and one was an eightplex.
So together we paid $122,000?
$120,000 plus, yeah.
Okay. You know, I just want to understand what.
That's right.
I know that, you know, and you've said up front, we're not going to make money on this, so.
That's right.
Then that's not I just like to identify what costs going in. So we had 122 and 320, so 425, north of 400,000, and then selling them for 120, 110, 330, or 230, so about half.
About 230, about half, that would be
About
fair to
half.
say, that's right.
So where did the funds come to buy the lot, to do well, you never told me what the demo was on asbestos.
About $20,000.
20,000, so we're up to 450, okay. So for that 450, where did that money come from? Well, I'm sorry.
The money came from home funds, and I'm not sure if we got to use some of the last of the HODAG money from the federal government for revitalization in the Antelope Valley area of town. That was some, you might call it orphan federal monies after Antelope Valley, and we were able to use them for housing purposes. It's home money, but it might be home money and HODAG money, but home I know for sure. These were built with home funds. I would need to check the source of money when we bought the buildings. I'll check.
I think one of the questions that I have is, after hearing those numbers, you're talking about having this 120 go back to the home fund and help another property or what have you. It sounds like the home fund has suffered a negative cash flow in this project. I'm not saying that's bad, I'm just saying, I'm just trying to understand the
That's
cash
right.
flow, so is that fair?
It's fair to say, and by the way, the logic is such that that will happen each and every time, but this one was very costly. And if one had perfect vision, I'm not sure that we would have done this. We would have probably tried to do multiple projects than this. But Cornhusker Bank came to us, and it was John Dittman, and he said, I've got a piece of property, it's underwater, I don't think it ought to come back, but I'd like to sell it and get it off, and it's not gonna happen, I know it's bad for the neighborhood, and I think John Dittman and Cornhusker Bank's been a good partner to do good things in this town, and we did that.
Well, they're all learning experiences, and you see,
They
maybe
are.
afterwards, you see, well, it worked well, but maybe another time. The other question I had was, you mentioned the mini houses that Mr. Christensen has championed, maybe on some other smaller lots that aren't normally built on. I just didn't quite understand what you said the cost of each of those might be.
You would still be talking north of $100,000 probably.
For a 500 square foot?
It will depend on what the structure is, but that's right, that's entirely, you could be north of $100,000.
Trent.
I think John's questions are precisely why the ordinance of having it come in front of the council on the purchase is needed, because then the council gets to decide whether we want to make that investment, because on every single one of these we've seen, we've lost money on the sale, but we've potentially put something more valuable back in the neighborhood, which is a homeowner who's paying property taxes, that has a nice house on the, that can start to turn that neighborhood and have other people looking at their house going, hey, maybe mine can look like that too. So, I mean, I think that's the important reason why we see these on the purchase side before we actually put the work in to sell them. Because before that, we were only seeing the sale, and John would run through his numbers, and we would all go, man, we are losing a lot of money on these things. But at least we are seeing them on the purchase side now, so that we can make the decision whether we want to lose money or not.
Remember, I hope that you will, that the administration did not dispute the Feller's proposition, and in fact, I wound up here saying that we could live with this and we'd do that.
Yeah.
So we don't dispute that that's a reasonable thing to do, so that you're not in a position of only seeing it at the back end.
Yep.
That's not unreasonable.
And I think the council agreed and passed it 7-0, and it sailed right through. So I think we got a good system here, and regardless of the federal money stays or goes, we can make those spending decisions on the front end rather than see it on the back end when we're selling. Because if you come to me with a piece of property that says, that you say, hey, we've redeveloped this and we have a buyer for it, I'm going to say sell it every day of the week.
Other questions for Dave? Okay. Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak to this item? Seeing none, please call the next item.
All right, I'll call items 20 and 21 together. They're amending Chapter 3.06 of the Lincoln Municipal Code relating to the formulation and submittal of the biennial budget by amending Section 3.06.020 to change the date by which the mayor's recommended biennial budget must be submitted to the City Council to June 15th, and repealing Section 3.06.020 of the Lincoln Municipal Code as hitherto existing, and a resolution establishing the timeline for the preparation and approval of the city's biennial budget.
Jeff Kirkpatrick, City Attorney. I'll introduce this, although this is a creature of the City Council. Councilwoman Lyrian Gaylor Baird, but with input from a number of council members. This is just to codify, I think, the discussion that came out of last year's budget process. And so it's a two-part proposition that says, in the resolution form, sets out the timeline for the next budget process with two schedules as far as the timeline, and then the ordinance change just establishes that after this biennial budget process is done, in future years, that the Finance Department will develop a process timeline and come to the City Council, but then the City Council will have it and can make whatever changes they want to. So even though in the ordinance, the Finance Department has the responsibility of developing the initial budget process timeline, it will be a creature of what the City Council wants to do going forward.
I'll just maybe build on that for a second before, if people want to discuss it. Right, so this is meant to be a response to concerns raised by council members about how the role that the council plays in the budgeting process. And we're a growing city. There's a lot more to manage every year, and we take that responsibility really seriously. So to accomplish some changes that help refine our role in that process, this legislation, as Jeff said, does a couple of things. It first establishes a new annual budget review. It will mean that the council is meeting with departments and discussing their budget and their fiscal situations on an annual basis. During the year that the mayor proposes a new biennial budget, the meetings will also serve as a forum for the City Council to provide initial budget input and establish their priorities prior to the development of the mayor's budget. And I think that was something that we heard expressed as something that was important to this body. So in short, this will give the council more opportunity for input earlier in the budget process. And then secondly, in discussions about how we might change the process, the idea came forward to move the release of the mayor's budget up a month to June 15th. And just by way of comparison, in the past, in 2014, the mayor released his budget on July 14th, and this council had about 9 business days to meet with 22 different departments, and then on the 10th business day, make our recommended changes. So by relieving some of that compression, we will have more time to develop and deliberate on what our proposed changes would be. And I want to thank city staff, county staff who came to some of these meetings and discussions, and also my colleagues, and in particular Cindy Lamb, who gave a lot of feedback that helped shape this. I hope that there's a fair amount of consensus among us at this point that this should address some of the major areas of concern and ultimately help us do our jobs better for the citizens. Cindy.
Thank you. So Councilwoman Gaylor Beard spent a lot of time, I know, working on the schedule for the 1820 city council budget process and the dates and so forth. And I'm just wanting to make certain that I understand in the resolution portion of this, which is item 21. In the resolution portion, moving forward, does this pass on responsibility for putting that schedule together to the city finance department? Or is it an effort that involves the city council?
Well, I think if you look back at the ordinance, it talks about, the ordinance change talks about prior to the second week in December. So you're trying to back up the process and give yourself time to think about it going forward. The finance department will develop and share with the council a budget process timeline.
Okay.
And I think what is anticipated is when you look at the next budget cycle, what you're doing is not throwing the whole thing out and starting over. You're tweaking it so that you're taking into account whatever changes there will be because of the calendar changes, but also whatever changes you think are necessary from the council's perspective as far as this worked well, maybe we needed more time in this stage, so let's move this forward or move it backwards. It may be that you'll come through the next budget cycle and then for the 2019-20, the next biennial, you'll say, you know, we made a lot of changes in July because we got the budget too early and there were a lot of things. We could have moved it back to the end of June and really got a more finished budget process. The point is, when it comes to you in December of the budget process, you'll have time to reflect back on your experience and tweak it however you want to, however best fits the future council.
So does this anticipate that we would each time get a new Schedule A, or that we would actually pass a new resolution with a Schedule A attached? That's really my question.
I think it anticipates that you'll have a new resolution with the Schedule A and B, which will reflect whatever calendar changes you want to make and whatever significant changes you want to make, if any, in the timeline.
Thank you.
I think there's also some flexibility there. You know, in the past, the schedule's been developed and it's been an informal process of just altering the dates, and should there be, you know, no controversy or no issues, it may not require a resolution. I mean, I think what the resolution and the schedules do is establish the expectations. They say, like, this is what we expect going forward. We wouldn't expect major deviation from this unless we all decided that that's what we wanted. And so this is to set the tone and the direction and the skeleton for future years out. Jane.
And I just want to say that that's exactly what the county board does. And so when we went to Dennis Meyer to get their input, the finance director, how they do it, the finance director of the finance department takes the format and readjusts it on an annual basis, and then goes back to the county board. Does this schedule make sense to everyone? And they review it quickly, and it's usually never a debatable item because everybody says that looks fine to us. Let's go on to the next business item. So, but I think this is a great start because I do appreciate all the input all the colleagues on the city council gave to this, and really I think it addresses a lot of concerns about giving us more opportunity to really review and dig into some of the budget items and have a better understanding. So I'm really appreciative.
I think it's worth pointing out, too, that the schedule for our budget briefings, the annual schedule, are organized a little bit differently. In the past, they've just been strictly by department, but with the new focus, I'd say enhanced focus on our citywide performance goals and outcomes and indicators that's been supplemented with our What Works Cities partnership and looking at developing a LinkStat program. We're moving towards enhancing the amount of data-driven decisions and budgeting. Organizing those budget briefings that take place in January and February by outcomes as opposed to strictly just we're meeting with Public Works today, we're meeting with the fire department the next day. We're looking at meeting by these outcomes. So there'd be a safety and security week, and different departments who address safety and security would come forward and talk about how they're doing that and provide some input to us about how their budgets reflect that. And we would have the opportunity to provide our feedback as well. So there's a kind of a different approach with those briefings. All right. Do we have other folks who'd like to testify or provide comment on this legislation? Oh, welcome.
Well, good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the council. Kyle Fisher, here representing the Lincoln Chamber of Commerce. We're located at the 3 Landmark Center. That's 1128 Lincoln Mall, Suite 100. And I'm here to say nice things about you today. The Chamber wants to appear in support and recognition of your actions regarding the budget and this ordinance. On the issue specifically, from our standpoint, the proposed changes seem to strike a nice balance, more in line with, as you've said, some of the concerns raised by the public during the budget debate last summer and stretched into the fall. We think giving the council more time to work with the departments, crunch your own numbers, but still preserving that strong mayor form of government that we have here in Lincoln is a natural progression, a natural path for you to go down. I think the old saying goes, you should walk before you run. And so making these changes via ordinance now, rather than maybe moving to a charter change as previously discussed, is probably the prudent step to take here. Really, I really appear today to have the Chamber on record again as complimenting you all on finding a compromise way forward, much like with the recycling ordinance. This is an issue that was contentious for quite some time, and it would appear now that both the administration and the council are supportive of what you have before you, and I think from the Chamber's perspective, it'll lead to a better budget process. So thank you, and we encourage your support.
Thank you. Any questions? All right. Would anyone else like to speak to these items? All right, seeing none, please call the next item.
All right, I'll call items 22 and 23. They are Comp Plan Conformance 16010, declaring approximately 4,525 square feet of property generally located adjacent to 710 Hill Street in Standing Bear Park as surplus property, and approving a property purchase and sale agreement for the sale of approximately 4,123.35 square feet in the southeast corner of Standing Bear Park to Lincoln Public Schools for circulation associated with operation of a food distribution center on the abutting LPS property.
Good afternoon, Nicole Flectus with Lincoln Parks and Recreation. I do have a map showing the proposed surplus area on the screen. This is a surplus and sale agreement to transfer about 4,100 square feet to Lincoln Public Schools. It's at the southeast corner of Standing Bear Park. LPS is in the process of developing a food warehouse and distribution center at this adjacent location, and they had requested this surplus due to kind of layout and configuration issues and the opportunity to get a driveway connection to that facility. This represents about 1/10 of an acre within a 20-acre park, and it's outside the active use area of the park. We have some facilities there, some active use facilities that include the Ball Diamond playground and some other things in that park, and this is outside of that area. The surplus area is within the floodplain, and LPS is committed to offset the fill that they're placing within this area by creating a drainage swale within the park. The trees will be preserved, and in fact, LPS is also committed to install or to provide funds to install landscape screening, so to screen their truck parking that will be on LPS property from the park. This had been reviewed by both the Parks and Recreation Advisory Board and the Planning Commission, and had unanimous recommendations of approval from both of those groups. I will point out, I did notice that the temporary access and construction agreement that's easement that's attached to the agreement should be labeled as Exhibit F rather than Exhibit A. So we may send you a substitute with this correction before you vote next week. And I'd just be available for any questions.
Thanks for coming out today. So when Mrs. Sawyer donated this parcel, were there any encumbrances that are going to cause us to have to replace this property?
There were not. We checked out the parcel, and it's free and clear in terms of making this transfer.
Thank you.
Go.
So the sale is for $4,070, and I see that we have a ledger where the city gets things from schools and schools get things from city, and this goes to that ledger balancing that? Is that how
right.
that works?
Yeah, so we've got an asset bank that was set up by interlocal agreement between the city and Lincoln Public Schools. And we keep a running ledger, and if you think about it, we just have so many opportunities where we're partnering or there's transactions, particularly if you think about as we're developing neighborhood parks in new areas of town. And so ultimately, that was set up for that purpose, and this will be part of that ledger. And the interlocal states that the parties can agree on the cost or get an appraisal, and in this case, we agreed based on some other parkland out at Jensen Park on that per acre cost.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Nicole? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Would anyone else like to come forward and testify on this item? Seeing none, please call the next item.
All right, next are items 24 and 25. They are change of zone 17003, application of New Covenant Community Church for a change of zone from AGR Agricultural Residential to R3 Residential and from AGR Agricultural Residential to RT Residential transition on property generally located at 6000 South 84th Street and the related development and conditional zoning agreement.
Good afternoon. My name is Craig Zacharias, and I live at 6721 South 66th Street, Lincoln, and I'm employed by New Covenant Community Church as an associate pastor. I'm responsible for the administrative actions of the church, and so that's why I am representing the 400 plus or minus members of our church today. Several years ago, before this area of Lincoln was developed as it has been, the church people, members bought about 26 acres here. Given the ministry reach and what's happening around us, the church board decided and the members decided to try to sell this portion of our land to open it up for housing. It would be something that's needed in this part of the town, housing, as well as it would turn something that was given to us years ago into more usable resources to administrate ministries and other actions of the church. So that's where we are today. I have Tim Geiger here from our architecture firm who can talk about specifics. If there's any other questions.
So, Pastor, thanks for being here today. So am I to understand the church itself is going to be the developer?
No, we are, I'm sorry, thank you
That's
for
okay.
asking that clarifying question. We are selling it.
Okay.
The intent is to get the rezoning done and then sell it to a developer, Prairie Homes, as a matter of fact.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh.
Pastor, did you have a course in doing this when you went to seminary?
No, I spent 28 years as a soldier and the last 15 as a pastor. So.
Okay, sometimes you get asked to do things you never thought you'd do. Thank you for your service.
Hi, my name is Tim Gergen, engineer with Clark Anderson Partners, representing the developer who is purchasing the property from the church. What we have here is the parcel is identified in red. We'll wait for this to come up real quick. The existing church here. We're purchasing this piece here. We're bounded on commercial to the north, single family on the south, 3 and 4 plexes here on the east, an apartment complex across the street, and then Lincoln Christian School here. We're going to keep this existing drainage way as is and retain the as much trees as possible in here to identify that buffer between the church and this existing residential. We're proposing a townhome development mainly consisting of single family attached housing.
Looks like you're leaving enough good green space for the Easter egg hunts on
Yes.
your side.
The development plan you see is we have a single access point off Foxtail. We're going to come around and then in here. What we are providing is if the church does find that if they ever have development needs in the future for this piece, or if it ever redevelops in the case, we're not creating a landlocked situation, so we can create that connectivity and have that street come across the drainage channel. Some items we are dealing with is kind of get it back into the same. is we're proposing to change the zone from AGR to R3. We have this little corner of RT district here, and that's to facilitate zoning next to a gas pipeline. We have a large natural gas pipeline that comes in and goes to a station here at this point. This represents the setback from the gas station, or from the gas line, that we won't have any development there too. We have signed a zoning agreement with the city to prohibit any residential development. In that, I believe the church is going to retain this piece, and I believe they have an office user lined up for that piece. On the other side of drainage channel, we have detention and open space, so we're going to coincide with the county's recommendation of the gas line setback.
Any questions? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Would anyone else like to speak to this item? David Carey, could you just come up for a staff question?
Good afternoon, David Carey with the Planning Department.
Just wanting to confirm, because in the staff report, of course, the Planning Commission had the condition of approval that there was this agreement that accompanied this application, which I see on our agenda, but was there all of the outstanding issues that needed to be ironed out in that agreement taken care of?
Yes.
Okay, great, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Teresa, please call the next item.
All right, next are items 26 and 27. They are change of zone 16042, application of Emily LLC for a change from R2 residential to B3 commercial at 3255 A Street and the related development and conditional zoning agreement.
Good afternoon, City Council. I am today representative that location, and
could you please just tell us your name and address first, please, sir?
My name is Deni Osmanovic, and I am representative Neighbor Cafe in 3255 A Street. And you guys all know about this. That's the rezoning, what's happening, and I all done process for that, and now I coming here to whatever you here decides it, and I will appreciate for all that.
Okay, thank you. Are there questions? Carl?
Yes, thank you. This is an intriguing idea that you're bringing. This was a former medical office, and you're wanting to make it into a neighborhood cafe for lunch and dinner.
Yes,
and so could you tell us a little bit about the kind of food that you'll be serving, and the capacity that you will have, and also understand that you're not seeking alcohol?
Yes. Okay. The type of food be European food, like German, Greece, before Yugoslavia, Croatia, German food. That can be really healthy food. Nothing can be cooked like by the Greece type of things, like Chinese food or some other type of food. This will be really healthy food. And also we can have in the porch area where can you be able to see really Italian pizza, cook upside, outdoor, and you can be able to enjoy meal or drink coffee, whatever you like to do, and you can see how really pizza come. It's kind of some traditional outdoor grilling and stuff like that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, any other questions? All right, thank you. Would anyone else like to testify on this item, these items? Any questions for staff? Okay. Teresa, please call the next item.
All right, I'll call items 28 through 30. They are annexation 17002, annexing approximately 61.91 acres at South 90th Street and A Street. Change of zone 17002, application of Jack Herbert, trustee of the Marie Herbert Trust, Marie Herbert, trustee of the Jack Herbert Trust, and Blue Rock Investments for a change from AG Agricultural to R3 Residential and from AG Agricultural to R1 Residential at South 90th and A Street, and the related conditional annexation and zoning agreement.
Madam Chair, members of the council, I'm Mark Hunziker, appearing on behalf of Herbert Development. This is an extension of the Herbert Brothers Indian Hills development that was done in the 1970s. This piece of property has been farmed and awaiting the extension of the Stevens Creek sewer since that time. And we think this is going to be a very well-received new addition to Lincoln. The lots are going to be nice and generous sized, and we think there's a great demand for it. So if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them, and we'd appreciate your approval.
John?
Yes, Mr. Hunziker, do you have an idea, speaking of the number of lots, how many would be developable in this area?
Total number of lots, I believe, is right around 180?
150.
150, okay.
And over how many years would that be available, do you think?
Well, that always depends on the demand, John. I think this will go very quickly. I would guess that this property will be fully developed in less than 5 years.
Additional questions for Mark? Thank you. Would anyone else like to testify on these items? All right, seeing none, Teresa, would you?
Okay, that concludes our public hearing. We can move into the voting session. Public hearing resolutions. Item 14 is the report of claims against the city for February 16th through the 28th, 2017, introduced by Fellers.
So moved.
Second.
Seconded by Carl. Discussion? Please call the roll.
Camp?
Yes.
Christensen?
Yes.
Eskridge?
Yes.
Fellers?
Yes.
Gaylor Baird?
Yes.
Lamb?
Yes.
Raybold?
Yes.
Motion carried 7-0. Item 15 is resolving that the city council will not rely on higher residential property valuations in order to increase spending above the level established in the biennial budget, introduced by Christensen.
So moved.
Second.
Seconded by John. Discussion? Jane?
I would like us to move to delay a vote on this until Monday, April 3rd, to allow us to have an opportunity to hear back from the finance department.
Second.
Delay for 2 weeks, moved by Jane, seconded by Carl. Discussion? John?
I'd be willing to go a week, but I'm not going to be able to be at that meeting. I think this is a very important piece of legislation, and it's not a binding one per se, but it's showing attention.
Would you be back the following week?
No.
Trent and Cindy?
I'm not going to support a delay, and the reason I wouldn't support a delay is that by delaying this to get more information, we would only be seeking to find how much money we're leaving on the table. We've already set a biennial budget, revenue and expenditures for 2 years. So by delaying, we're just seeking to find how much money above and beyond what the budget that we already set, because this is a reevaluation and an increase. We would only be finding the answer to how much more money we could bring into our budget, and our budget's already been set.
Cindy?
Thank you. So what I heard in the testimony was, what we're really talking about is we're talking about holding the dollars constant. So there's no information that we're going to get that really is going to change what this intention of this is, to hold the dollars constant. And so I have faith that the finance department, based on testimony I heard and what I know of the finance department, they'll be able to work out the details. And this isn't really about the details. I think this is about really giving some reassurance to people in Lincoln, the homeowners in Lincoln that have had to gone out and disputed their evaluations, but even those that can't, there are a number of people that they don't have the time to do that, and they just kind of feel helpless in the whole process, as if it won't do anything anyway. And I would just I think there may be a couple of amendments to the resolution itself, but I don't think a time delay would be helpful at this point in time, so I won't support that. Thank you.
One of the biggest needs in our community is public safety, and there is currently a group that's at work, and they have their last meeting on Wednesday of this week to look at how we are organizing our police teams, and one of the reasons why they're looking at reducing from 5 to 4 teams is because of the number of officers that we have. I would like to know that before making a decision. That's a really big deal for me. If the reason we're going to 4 teams is to spread resources, already thin resources thinner, that concerns me. So I don't know what the outcome of that's going to be, but I would love to have another week or two to make that decision, to have that information.
John.
Yeah, I'd just like to add, one of the things with this legislation, there was some discussion that we represent about 17% of the property tax levy. I think we can show leadership here to the other entities, and I mean, we even are part of the other entities like the RTSD, the Public Building Commission, and others. And so, why not be a number one in this area, lead the pack, and say to them? And again, it's an intent type resolution, but I think we would demonstrate good leadership by passing this.
Jane.
You know, again, I stated before, I feel very strongly that we should not be misleading the public. I like the fact of taking a leadership role, and I think the Lincoln City Council has demonstrated that we've done that time and time again. But it puzzles me, the urgency of getting this established. I don't know if it's a political environment, but I think it's important to understand what type of money are we talking about? And I want to be transparent with our taxpayers in saying, this is what the budget is looking like. This is what you can actually expect, realistically expect to either see in a reduction in your property tax bill that you're going to be paying, so that they have a better understanding. I firmly believe that many people, when they hear us talk about this issue, anticipate a greater reduction, whether or not they appeal their current evaluation, that they're thinking that they're going to be seeing a deeper reduction. And I don't want to mislead, or I don't want to fool anybody out there that our part of the pie is much smaller compared to all the other political subdivisions that are involved in this property tax rate. To me, it's important to see the numbers, and I don't see the urgency. I love the fact that we're talking about this. I think that's fundamental, that the taxpayer knows that we are concerned about it. But I think in all honesty, you need to see where the numbers are trending and what it's going to look like ultimately. And going, how much money is going to be left on the table, I don't necessarily look at that way. I look at to be able to show our taxpayers, this is what we're going to be working on, and this is what we're trying to achieve, so that they have a better understanding. But I don't see the urgency and the rush to get this wrapped up and resolved. And I personally would like to see all the numbers that the finance department can give to us, so we have a better understanding where we're going with it.
Okay. I think you've had a chance to talk about the motion.
She got 2 chances. She did.
She moved
I
it.
made the motion, that's why.
I had 2 chances.
Okay.
Pardon?
I got 2 chances. So
I didn't get one.
I think it's an important issue.
If you would like to, go ahead.
I would like to respond to that. If you want to look at the numbers for what the city needs for expenditure, go look at 1718 of the budget that was adopted, that was introduced by the mayor. Those are the revenue expenditures. And by charter, we can make minor changes to that, and we do, but those are relatively minor changes. This, however, is a fairly major influx of revenue that our priorities stated last fall, the budget that was released by the mayor on July 15th, stated that's what we needed to operate our city government for fiscal year 17 and 18. And if we want to honor that commitment that we've made to both commercial and residential taxpayers, I think we should move that forward today. We don't necessarily need to know the revenue that is coming in. Now, Roy's resolution leaves some wiggle room for things that are things that may come up, like were brought up today, like Carl's talking about. But this is a statement of intent. We know how much money we need to operate the city for the next biennium. And that dollar figure, revenue and expenditures, was in the 17 and 18 budget. And if you read the court's opinion, we would have a ministerial duty to accept that levy and lower it down to accept the dollar amount that between the property tax value levy and the levy rate to hit that target of revenue. That's all we need to operate the 17-18 budget. That's what we need. That's what the court said. Hey, ministerial duty to accept that. So if this wasn't a resolution and it was a tax levy resolution today, we would be accepting that as a ministerial duty. I don't see any difference between the resolution that Roy has today and a resolution to accept a property tax levy at lower and what it takes to hit that 17-18 budget. There shouldn't be any difference.
Any other further discussion on the motion to delay? All right. Please call the roll.
Camp?
No.
Christensen?
No.
Eskridge?
Yes.
Fellers?
No.
Gaylor Baird?
No.
Lamb?
No.
Raybold?
Yes.
Motion lost 2-5.
Okay, and now on the main motion discussion. Cindy, then Carl.
Thank you. I'm wondering if Councilman Christensen would accept a friendly amendment to add commercial property to the language that indicates the city will not rely on increased property tax revenues resulting from higher residential and commercial property valuations in order to increase spending.
Second?
Let me,
By
she
Cindy and
asked
seconded by
about a
Trent.
second, a friendly, and we've gone through this territory before, and it's much cleaner if we don't try to attach friendly amendments, and we just do amendments.
Okay, I just want an amendment, friendly or not.
So
moved by Cindy and seconded by Trent. Discussion. I'd like to clarify, I'd like to get a better understanding of what you're trying to achieve since the revaluation is only on residential properties.
Well, that has been the concern that's been brought about the revaluation, but I think if you look at line 13 in the councilman's resolution, it says the city will not rely on the increased property tax revenue resulting from higher residential property valuations in order to increase spending above the level established in the city's biennial budget. I'm just saying we won't rely on any increased property tax revenues resulting from higher residential and commercial property valuations, just to make sure that everyone's clear that we know the levy is going to be to spread across those. And the main language there is we're not going to rely on anything to increase any spending. So do you feel that that's not the proper place to place that?
I guess I just want to understand better. What I understood Roy's intent was that he was allowing for new growth. And so if there's new growth in commercial property or residential property, that would be a carve out going forward because of the idea that we want growth to be paying for itself. So how does what you're proposing work with Roy's intention? I guess I don't understand. So
I think
can we get some
that-
clarification?
I think Ms. Wolf mentioned or reaffirmed that the levy applies across the board to all real property. Doesn't matter whether it's agriculture, commercial, or residential. And I think what Ms. Lamb is saying here, Councilwoman Lamb is saying, let's put that word in there. I suppose you could add agriculture too. I don't know if there's much of that in the city, but there could be a little bit.
Yeah. So, and I think that was the question that was answered by Sherry when she came forward. We're talking about the constant dollar, that they're going to make those adjustments anyway, and the constant dollar the attempt to keep a constant dollar for what our expenditures are under our budget?
I guess I'd like to hear from the city attorney on this because it seems like there's a potentially significant difference. I want to understand it better before having to vote on a change in the resolution.
City Attorney Jeff Kirkpatrick, the reason why it was drafted the way it was at Councilman Christensen's request was to focus on the issue that is before you, which is the reevaluation of residential property that was done ahead of the schedule that was anticipated by the City Finance Department. Certainly, because it is a resolution that only talks about intent, that is not binding on the council, you can make whatever adjustments you want to without necessarily changing the commitment that you're making. I think that when you add commercial to this without having a commercial revaluation, you're kind of watering down the message. But certainly, it's not going to be a change that's going to change the main focus of the resolution.
I'll withdraw I believe that may be true, and I'll withdraw my motion to amend.
And I have a question for Jeff.
Okay.
Jeff, can you tell me, how is this a non-binding agreement?
Well, because it talks about the intent of the council, but as I think you've raised with your questions and your desire to hold off and get more information, even if you put it off for a couple of weeks, there's going to be a lot more information that's going to emerge in August, let alone in the next few weeks. All of that are going to play into what is possible and what is desirable by this council in August, as far as what the demands are, what's going to be unforeseen circumstances, what actually is going to be your tax base, both residential, commercial, agriculture, all of it together, whether you're going to have more sales tax that was unanticipated because of Amazon, whether you're going to have less occupation tax because of the continuing trend toward fewer landlines within the city. What I drafted at Councilman Christensen's request was something to express the intent without tying you into something because you don't know all the factors that are going to be before you in August. So if you could hold all those constant, what Councilman Christensen wanted is a intent to say, we're going to lower the tax levy. If we could hold all of those things constant, but also is drafted in a way to indicate we know we can't hold all of those things constant, and we're going to deal with whatever the reality is in August of 2017 as it comes up.
Okay. All right, so thank you.
Thank you.
I have just one question about, I don't think it needs to be a motion to amend, but we have the word re-evaluation here instead of revaluation. Is that something that Teresa can fix clerically in the language before it's in line 2? Okay. Now, I had, Cindy, were you done with your comments on discussion on the main motion, or did you want to continue? Because Carl was next.
Oh, yeah, I would like to talk about the main motion, if that would be okay.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Okay. So I'm going to support this motion. I think it talks really clearly about our intent to return the windfall to the taxpayers. And I know that Councilwoman Raybold has brought up the sense of urgency, but the reality is that this has already been out there now for a month. I mean, as soon as they came out and said valuations, then our chair came out and said, hey, I'm going to champion giving that value, that windfall back to the taxpayer, and I think that's really important. And I'm grateful for she and Councilman Christensen for taking that lead. And I would just refer back to the language that the city will not rely on the increased property tax revenue in order to increase spending. That's the intent, is not to rely on that to increase any spending, recognizing that we already have our 17-18 budget, as Councilman Fellers indicated, that as was testified to earlier, the charter precludes us from changing that budget unless it's there's some unforeseen circumstance. And I think that this is a great way to tell the taxpayers that we join our colleagues in a commitment to returning, making sure that we're not taking advantage of a windfall that falls on their backs. So I'm going to support the resolution.
Carl.
Thank you. I appreciate Roy bringing this forward. I think it does give us an opportunity to talk about an important issue, and that issue is taxes. We don't want taxes to be any higher than at all possible. I was asking about the questions of unforeseen circumstances because that's what I'm nervous about with what happens, what ifs. And so I am sufficiently satisfied with the answer there that any of those what ifs that I tried to imagine, that those would potentially be addressable if they happen. If we are in a dire situation, then we can deal with them. So for that reason, I think given the statement that we're making to the community that we are trying to hold the line on taxes, and I think that's an important thing for us to let people know, that we'll support it.
Jane?
This one I struggle with, but I'm going to be honest, I am not going to support it. I want to reach out to the taxpayers and tell them I care very deeply about managing our budgets fiscally responsibly. And I'm a little frustrated on two levels. Number one, I'm frustrated that when members bring a request for a legitimate delay, it's 10 times out of 10 denied by the majority. And I struggle with that. And the second issue is that I like to see all the numbers. I really do. We're having a great dialogue, and I think that's what our taxpayers expect us to do, to delve into the issues, to look at them, and talk about them. And I think we've done that. I think our intent is always out there and obvious, maybe not to all the taxpayers, as it should be, that we do try to balance our budgets and make sure that we stick to the budgets that are given to us and that we don't do money grabs so that we can think that we can spend all the money that comes in. That's not at least how I have been operating with our colleagues. I think that's how we evaluate the budgets very carefully. So, two levels. I would respectfully request a delay. I think at times our colleagues should be reasonable and open-minded and honor a request as we have done so for them. Second of all, you should have all the numbers. I don't think it's reasonable to make decisions when you don't have all the numbers, regardless of how much money you think you're leaving on the table or how it impacts the budgets or getting more information. And I think a reasonable delay of 2 weeks is practical. So for that reason, I am not going to support this resolution at this point in time.
Trent?
Again, if you want to know the numbers of what it takes to run city government for the 17 and 18 budget, go back and look at that line in the last budget. That's why we have a biennial budget period. If you'd like to go back to an annual budget period, we can have that conversation and go through the change in the charter. But we have a biennial budget for a reason. And the reason is that we don't go through this entire spending exercise every single year, that we plan for things for 2 years, we make minor adjustments in the middle of that biennium, and this is something we haven't ever seen before, where we had a lot of money that's coming in. What Roy's doing, it's just saying, hey, we're going to give back the valuation windfall back to taxpayers, and he's not even talking about the sales tax dollars that we're going to see coming in from Amazon or the expansion of the base. So there is extra revenue there that provides an even greater cushion there. And you guys can have that discussion when I'm gone in August, and you should. But today is about a statement of intent where people are fired up about property taxes. I know if you're going door to door right now, you're probably hearing it. And to say, hey, we have what we need to run the city in 17 and 18, and we're moving forward from there. And if you have a catastrophe, Roy has left some wiggle room for you to be able to move out of that and for the city to operate. And I think that's responsible and prudent. And I appreciate him bringing this forward. And I intend to fully support it.
Roy?
Well, thanks everybody for your comments, both in support and in objection to this. And yes, running for office and knocking on doors and hearing from people at events, this is an issue. They want to hear about what we intend to do. I've got heartbreaking examples of senior citizens who say to me, I'm almost to the point where I can't live in my house anymore because I'm retired and can't afford to pay increased monthly expenses in the form of taxes or anything else. Lincoln has to be an inclusive community to everyone. And whenever we take actions, we know that there's people that are affected positively, and we've got to acknowledge there's some people that are affected negatively. This is a situation where we already have our budget in place. We know what it's going to be. We know what the revenues required will be. And so, you know, this is an important thing a statement to tell the public. Now, the second point I'll make is, you know, about knowing the future. What's it going to be like? Well, when we get there, we'll know, and we'll be able to make a binding decision at that point. So, but from now to then, well, Yogi Berra said making predictions is difficult, especially when you're talking about the future. So I think we've crafted this legislation in a resolution in a manner that allows us to adapt to whatever comes up. And the final thing here is this truly is an invitation to other taxing authorities to follow our lead.
Did you want a chance to speak? Okay. I appreciate the intentions of this legislation. Jane, I just want to say that your frustration about delay is understandable. We typically do honor requests by any member for delay. I didn't support it this time because there's absolutely nothing time sensitive about this legislation, whether it's today or 2 weeks from now or any time before May. As we've heard, this is symbolic. It is not binding because we can't bind a future council to action. So really, the date doesn't matter. The appropriate time for meaningful legislation that's binding will come in late summer. So I guess the question is, why now? I mean, I hope it's not to help people on the doors, because that's not a great reason to do legislation. But it is important that we shield people from the full impact of this revaluation, and I think that we probably do share consensus on the need and willingness of each of us to do that. So I will support this. Please call the roll.
Camp?
Yes.
Christensen?
Yes.
Eskridge?
Yes.
Fellers?
Yes.
Gaylor Baird?
Yes.
Lamb?
Yes.
Raybold?
No.
Motion carried 6-1. Item 16, use permit 126F, application of Wilderness Woods Holdings to reduce the parking requirement for office uses on Lot 2 from 1 stall per 300 square feet to 1 stall per 350 square feet at Wilderness Woods Place and Executive Woods Drive, introduced by Fellers.
So moved.
Second.
Seconded by Carl. Discussion? Please call the roll.
Camp?
Yes.
Christensen?
Yes.
Eskridge?
Yes.
Fellers? Gaylor Baird?
Yes.
Lamb? Raybold?
Yes.
Motion carried 7-0. Item 17 is approving the award of contract to the low bidder for the agreement between the city and NDOR for the South Coddington Avenue and West Van Dorn Street intersection safety project, introduced by Fellers.
So moved.
Second?
Seconded by Jane. Discussion?
And we do have a motion to amend number 1.
Did one of you want to move that?
I move motion to amend number 1 that will really name the contractor that's going to be doing this construction work. Because at the time that this resolution was introduced, we didn't have the bid awarded.
Motion to amend number 1 moved by Jane, seconded by Trent. Discussion? Please call the roll.
Camp?
Yes.
Christensen?
Yes.
Eskridge?
Yes.
Fellers?
Yes.
Gaylor Baird?
Yes.
Lamb?
Yes.
Raybold?
Yes.
Motion carried 7-0.
And now on the main motion.
Camp?
Yes.
Sorry, Carl is raising his
sorry.
hand.
Just briefly, this is a really important intersection. It's a dangerous intersection as currently exists, and this is going to be a great safety help. especially as, well, this area is growing and Pioneers Park is increasing with the events out there. This is a good thing for our city. 188 days, remember that, hold them to it, okay?
Give some time for that rooster to look over.
Yeah.
Jane?
Wanted to ditto everything that Carl has said because it's a very important intersection and getting busier all the time.
All right, please call the roll.
Camp?
Yes.
Christensen?
Yes.
Eskridge?
Yes.
Fellers?
Yes.
Gaylor Baird?
Yes.
Lamb?
Yes.
Raybold? Yes. Motion carried, 7-0. Public hearing ordinances second reading are items 18 through 30. Ordinances third reading, item 31, change of zone 08010A, application of JLI West Incorporated to amend the Woodside Village Planned Unit Development at Northwest 48th and West Holdridge Street, introduced by Christensen.
So moved.
Second.
Seconded by Carl. Discussion? Please call the roll.
Camp?
Yes.
Christensen?
Yes.
Eskridge?
Yes.
Fellers?
Yes.
Gaylor Baird?
Yes.
Lamb?
Yes.
Raybold?
Yes.
Motion carried, 7-0. Item 32 is approving amendment number 1 to the Hub Hall Heights Conditional Annexation and Zoning Agreement, introduced by Christensen.
So moved.
Second.
Seconded by Carl. Discussion? Please call the roll.
Camp?
Yes.
Christensen?
Yes.
Eskridge?
Yes.
Fellers?
Yes.
Gaylor Baird?
Yes.
Lamb?
Yes.
Raybold?
Yes.
Motion carried, 7-0. Our resolutions on first reading are items 33 through 39. And as I mentioned in directors, we need to delay introduction for 1 week on item 34.
So moved.
Second.
A delay for 1 week, moved by Carl and seconded by John. All right, please call the roll.
Camp?
Yes.
Christensen?
Yes.
Eskridge?
Yes.
Fellers?
Yes.
Gaylor Baird?
Yes.
Lamb?
Yes.
Raybold?
Yes.
Motion carried, 7-0.
Madam Chair, I'd move adjournment.
Second.
Moved by John, seconded by Roy. Please call the roll.
Camp?
Yes.
Christensen?
Yes.
Eskridge?
Yes.
Fellers?
Yes.
Gaylor Baird?
Yes.
Lamb?
Yes.
Raybold?
Yes.
Motion carried, 7-0.
Don't leave before you
Yeah, gavel it out.